Welcome to the Been There, Done That podcast with Angela Dunn Cartledge. Hey there, it's Angela from Been There, Done That. If you're navigating the wild, unpredictable world of grief, I want to invite you to something special. It's called Messy Mornings, and it's our free weekly newsletter filled with real talk, gentle reminders, and support that actually meets you where you are. Each week, I'll send you stories, reflections, healing prompts straight to your inbox. No fluff, no pressure, just the space to release, feel, and heal. You don't have to do this alone. Head over to dunnthatpodcast.com and sign up for Messy Mornings. It's totally free and it's made with you in mind. I've been there, and let's walk through this together. Hi, everybody. This is the Been There, Done That podcast. I'm your host, Angela Dunn Cartledge, and I am here with my new good friend, Santa Molina-Marshall. We are going to talk about grief and trauma and healing and all of those things you expect from this show.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Angela. It's an honor to be here and to be speaking to your audience.
Thank you. I would love for you to tell everybody what you want to bring to the show.
I think that, let me tell them a little bit about me first. Again, my name is Santa Molina-Marshall. I'm originally from the Dominican Republic and grew up in New York City and now live in the DMV. And I'm a holistic clinical psychotherapist, which means to me that in addition to being a social worker, that's my license as a social worker, I encourage people to find what helps them in their healing, whatever that may be. So we're going to discuss, is it prayer? Well, maybe not because I'm an atheist. Then is it meditation? Is it chanting? Is it crystals? Is it tinctures? Or is it pharmaceuticals? Like what? Is it dancing? Right? Is it drumming? What works for you? I am also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and grew up in a very dysfunctional family, Angela. Lots of alcoholism, mental illness, abuse of all sorts. And so I found that even though I'd been in therapy from childhood, right, like family therapy and court mandated stuff, that it wasn't until I decided this stuff is not working for me. Like I could talk and I had great talk therapist, but I need more. I need to lay on the ground. I need yoga. I need breathing exercises. I need tinctures. I need the works, right? That I realized that that's what I can bring to the world is an approach that says, I am the expert at the issues and I am a trauma specialist. That's obviously what I chose to specialize in. I'm the expert on the issues, but you're the expert on the way you heal and on your experience. And it just brings so much ease. I'm very transparent in my work. I published a book, Running Through Darkness, Memoir of a Spiritual Warrior. And it's my life story, but also what I did that was helpful. What I did. And everything I offer are experiences that I have had in my personal healing journey. And it is a journey, right? Journey. I was going to say, I'm always excited to go back to your question of what to talk about today. So many things, right? But I'm excited about talking about loss and the many different ways in which loss, grief shows up in our lives, particularly the ones that are not acknowledged, honored, or that we don't have a place to kind of commemorate about. But I'm open to whatever feels right. Yes.
That's perfect. I know that we talked a little bit about loss that you can't exactly put your hands on. The loss that relationship potentially or of a dream. Those kinds of things are more hard to define, I think, and people really don't give themselves the space to be able to grieve those things. How do you coach someone through finding the thing that they are not grieving that they should?
Finding the thing that they're not grieving and that they should. Well, the thing is that a lot of experiences of grief show up as sadness to different degrees, right? Everything's on a continuum. So they show up like sadness or depression, which shows up like I'm not motivated, I don't really have joy, and that's how it shows up, right? So the finding it is really defining what is it that you're missing, right? And it could be that job that I thought I was going to get as not that losing a job or not getting a job is easy grief, right? But as top level as losing your job or not being able to have whatever it is, materialistic things that we want, right? From that to the I never had the child or the parent or the safe home, right? So but it begins with really exploring what is it that's keeping you from joy? What is it that keeps you feeling sad and stuck? And we normally get to there's something that's been missing. There's a loss. There's a void, right? The other way in which it shows up, Angela, is through the exploration of addictions. In 12-step programs, there's this term of filling the hole, the God hole, they call it, the God hole with whatever it is, food, shopping, alcohol, drugs, right? And those are also experiences where what is it that you're missing? What is it that you're trying to avoid by using substances or behaviors that are impulsive, addictive, compulsive? What is it that you're missing is usually something that before you know it, there at surface, it's grief, it's loss. It's something wanted and needed that is not there. And especially as you mentioned, the ambiguous ones, right? The ones that people don't know about. Meaning by people I mean the public, right? I know I'm missing. I never had a child or I never got that job or, I personally, Angela, I went through periods of grieving my childhood because I don't really feel like I had a childhood. It was robbed, right? So it often just rises from discussions about why are you unhappy?
That's what I was going to say is that the multifaceted of it is that it will rise. It will show up, whether you want it to or not. It's going to happen, that it will come to the surface if you're willing to uncover, pick up the rugs, look under the pillows, kind of dig around in your soul and find out what's going on. You're going to be able to do that a lot easier um, once you give yourself the space to do it. But you have to be willing, right? I feel like that's the most important key is to be willing to do that work and to be willing to uncover something that you may have a hard time remembering. Not that
Well, I think
not that you've suppressed it, but that you will have pain associated with remembering it, if that makes any sense.
yes, it's the fear, right? The fear that it'll be unmanageable. So much of the people I work with around issues of grief, the biggest fear is can I manage it? Can I tolerate it? Will I be okay? So I'm sad or depressed or somewhat frozen, immobilized. But that's better than being in the grief and crying and wailing and unfunctionable, right? The fear that I won't be able to function. And yet, I like to say, yeah, there may be a day or two when you may need to lay in bed with a heavy blanket over you and just sob. Like, that's okay. But so much more is gained, right? Like, so much more relief and access to emotions and life and all kinds of things, not just the grief. So the grief and not dealing with it, right, keeps you at this low level existence. But once you're able to face it with lots of support, I'm not saying it's easy, and realize that it's not going to last forever. You're not going to cry for years and years and years. At some point, it gets easier. I don't know how, time, understanding, acceptance, but it gets easier. And then you can reclaim, right? reclaim all of that time you lost.
I particularly resonate with what you were saying about grieving the loss of your childhood. That the 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 abuse that you sustained, but also the dysfunction that you sustained, sort of created this place where you didn't feel like you could be a child. You didn't feel like you could enjoy that time of your life. Talk us through how you assist patients in those moments when they realize that that is the root of their grief.
I smile and laugh, and it may seem out of place and inappropriate because that's my favorite topic, really. Is that question brings up the topic of, and I always say this to, and I call them clients, not patients, because, it's not my turn, is what I say to my clients. I have my day when I'm on the other side of the couch or the screen or whatever, right? It's just not my turn. But I think that the reason why I get excited about that conversation is because, and what I say to my clients is, at some point I say, are you willing to parent a child? And I just got goosebumps. That's part of what happens to me when I feel like I'm speaking deep into the truth, right? Are you willing to parent that child? Are you willing to take that child on? And it's a little bit different than, there's a lot of, I've been working in this field for 35 years. And I say that because I want you all to know that, right? My audience to know that, your audience to know that, but also because I've been doing what was called inner child work for years. Now it's called parts work. And I like the distinction because, yes, I come from old school where it was all about the child, inner child, right? But now we know that, there are many different parts, and some of them are not children, some of them are adults, right? Parts. But talking about parts is very intimidating to many people. Does that mean I have dissociative disorder? What does that mean? I have a mental illness? What does that mean, right? That's a whole nother conversation for another time. But inner child means, to me, yeah, you missed out. And guess what happens when children are in experiences where there's a lot of dysfunction and where adults are not carrying their weight for whatever reason? I'm not into bashing our parents. They did the best they could with the little bit they had, right? But what happens is that those children mature way before their time, right? They mature way before their time. I cooked my first Latin meal when I was 7. My mom would just leave bottles of this. I put a little bit of each of these and make it boil, and we'll see what happens. And that's how I learned. I don't cook with recipes, right? So here I was, a 7-year-old kid, making beans and rice and stewed chicken. I matured way before my time. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a little girl in me that was scared. Got really excited when people ate the food. It's like, woo, I did it, right? I got celebrated, but also the fear, right? The fear of having my father show up drunk. He was the alcoholic in my family. The fear of how he abused my brothers physically, discipline, right? Those things, it doesn't mean that there wasn't a child hiding somewhere, right? And also the thing that I was going to say, and then I got a little sidetracked with my own story, which happens, is that developmentally, as a 7-year-old, I was supposed to be doing something else. Developmentally, I was not a young adult learning how to be independent. Right? At 7, I'm still learning how to be friends with kids and how to socialize and how to, at that level. But I got bumped up. It's like I say to people, it's like ending up in 5th grade when you should have been in kindergarten. So we learned the 5th grade stuff, right?
I always used to call it like getting a promotion without the pay.
Or getting a
That's the way it
promotion
felt.
without the pay.
Yeah, that's the way it felt to me.
Exactly.
Responsible without authority.
Without the authority, without the rewards. And so the thing about developmental phases, and not to get very clinical or technical, is that we are, as human beings, we adapt. Like we're gonna do the job that you gave me the promotion for. But somewhere in my history, there's something that I didn't learn, and I'm gonna get stuck over here, or overwhelmed, or flustered, or angry, right? So the developmental arrest is what we call it. There's developmental arrest in children who grow up in dysfunctional homes. So are you willing to parent a child that lives within you? Are you willing to take care of that child? Right? When you're frustrated, are you, as an adult, are you just saying, oh man, I'm frustrated again? Or are you saying, oh, sweetie, take a deep breath. It's okay. Right? It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be disappointed. Are you tending to that child? Right? And so I think that that's the only way, Angela, for me at least, that's the only way is, are you willing? And I like saying, guess what? You just adopted a kid, and she or he or they will go with you wherever you go, right? So when you're going into situations that are scary, remember, ask, how you doing? We're on a job interview. You okay with this? Whatever it may be, right? We're walking down a dangerous neighborhood. Are you okay? And what do you need to offer yourself in the ways of affirmation and the ways of self-talk, and also maybe even material things, right? What do you need for that child to be safe?
I love that, and
I
it
love
gives
that,
me
and
hope that
it
there
gives
are
me hope that there are
that I can continue to
that I
grow
can
through my
continue to grow
process
through
and
my process
continue
and
to
continue
benefit my own
to benefit
inner
my own
child,
inner child,
um,
or
or my
or
6-year-old part,
my 6-year-old part,
as I like
as
to call her.
I like to call her.
There are so many
There are so
things that
many
we
things that we
think of as trauma,
think of
and
as
so many
trauma,
things that we
and so
don't
many
think of
things
as
that we
trauma.
don't think of as
And I
trauma.
feel like
And
there's
I
this
feel like there's
distinction,
this
and I always like to
distinction,
call them
and I
mini
always like to
traumas,
call them
like
mini
little
traumas,
micro
like
traumas that
little
sort of
micro
lead up
traumas
to
that
a
sort of lead up
thing.
to a thing.
I go back to your
I go
example,
back
but
to
also
your
my own
example, but
example of a childhood that didn't feel like a
childhood that
childhood,
didn't feel like a
where
childhood,
there were lots of
where
little
there were lots of
events.
little events.
There were some big events
There were
too, but
some
there were
big
lots of
events
little
too, but there were
events that
lots
sort
of
of led
little
up to
events that
something
sort of led
bigger,
up to something bigger,
and a lack
and
of
a lack
security, a lack
of
of
security,
safety.
a lack of safety.
In those
In those
situations, when you
situations,
get to be
when
a
you
grown up
get to be a
and
grown
you
up
have already
and you
built what
have
you
already
consider to be a
built what you
construct
consider to
around
be a
what is
construct
safe and
around
what is
what is
secure
safe
and
and
all
what
of
is
those
secure and
things,
all of those things,
how can you
how
rebuild
can
those
you rebuild
constructs?
those constructs?
Because generally speaking,
Because
I've
generally
found in my
speaking,
own
I've found
experience
in my
that
own experience that
those constructs were
those
not
constructs
no
were
longer serving me when I
no
got to
longer
be an
serving
adult.
me when I got to be an
They were
adult.
built by a child
They were
brain,
built
right?
by a child
So
brain, right?
how do
So
we
how do
manage to
we manage to
reconstruct
reconstruct
around those
around
ideas
those
of safety and
ideas of
security when
safety
we're
and
a grown up?
security when we're a grown up?
Well, I think that it starts with acknowledging that something's not working. Again, if it's what is it? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it's broke, be curious, right? If something's not working, if you're having challenges with relationships, it's, for example, right? Another thing I get, a lot of my clients show up with, I don't know why, but I pick the wrong people, or I end up in the wrong place, or I'm tired of being alone. Okay, that could be everybody else, right? That could be your environment that's just not good for you. But it could also be something that you've learned that you're doing that's alienating you, pushing people away, that makes you feel unsafe. So I think that the answer to that question is the answer to any question when people come to me is they come with a concern. What is not working in your life? And then from there, we begin to be curious. I like calling it just be curious. What are you doing that people that you hear often, right? We can't trust because we don't trust, by the way, right? We don't trust when we come from those kind of backgrounds, but we hear repetition. It's like, oh, I've heard this 3 or 4 times, right? How people perceive me. And then can you be curious and do your own investigation about what that's like for you? And that's where it begins. There's so many things that we can do to relearn, right? To relearn new skills, to relearn new ways of being. I love 12-step programs, and there's a 12, I saw it's been many, many, many years, but I saw a little cartoonish thing that said 12-step program for healthy families. There were two members, right? There's this 12-step program for everything. Those programs are free. They're very supportive. Yeah, they have, a dogma, which is that first program, that Alcoholics Anonymous program. But, they offer so much support. There's even what did someone say to me? Well, I know that there's meetings called ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, which they've changed it. And now it means adult children from dysfunctional families, right? So are you open to learning, right? The reading, the exploring, remaining curious about, if you're not happy, something's happening, something's off. The other thing that I want to say is your body, right? There's a book, in addition to my book. There's many other books, right? There's a book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I particularly like that book because the body does keep a score. And this is really important, Angela. Our bodies pick up everything. They remember the good, the bad, the indifferent. They remember everything, right? So when you sense something in your body, honor it. Now, here's the tricky part, if I may take a moment to speak about this, is that just because I sense something's off doesn't mean it's off. What it means is assess. Santa, assess. Right? Just because I feel something's dangerous doesn't mean that it is. But it's a gift. It's a warning that says, Santa, assess for danger. Right? Assess what you're sensing. Check it out with other people. Write about it. Think about it. Yeah. Because our body remembers everything. But here's the thing. The body doesn't have a sense of time. So I may encounter you right now and say, ooh, she's a mean lady. And you have nothing mean about you. But for example, I can go with that and never get to know you because my body sensed that you were mean. Or I can ask myself, it's a warning. So let's keep that in mind, right? That I think Angela may be mean. So let me gather more information. Let me assess. Let me check in with that inner child, right? And also that inner wisdom, because that's the other thing. Children who grow up in dysfunctional families also have incredible, keen intuition and sense. They don't understand why, right? So because the body doesn't have a sense of time, I could just be triggered. You may remind me of someone, right? So the body remembers everything, but it doesn't know whether it's today's, yesterday's, or even tomorrow, because it can anticipate. Because how the body remembers is through sensation. It's vibration, it's sensation. If something just seems to be off, I think it's off. I automatically think it's off. So warnings, pauses, time to say, assess for danger, Santa. Doesn't mean that it's true. But the body will give you all kinds of hints, right? Don't dishonor it. And I think that that's what a lot of people do. It's like, oh, don't jump to conclusion. Don't believe it, right? Be open. No, if my body says, watch out, I'm not going to make a final decision until I assess and question and investigate, right? But I'm going to honor. That's the first clue. Yeah.
That's what I love about what you're saying about triggering, is that was exactly where my brain went, was that the reason you saw that in someone was because they reminded you of someone that actually did hurt you. And that triggering process has to have awareness around it. Otherwise, you will destroy every relationship that comes along, because there will always be something in there that that warns you against whatever is happening, and it's not safe. So that is such a cool way to think about it, and a great opportunity for me and our audience to learn that, to pay attention, just be aware and pay attention to what's going on around us and how
Right?
it's, yeah, absolutely.
I like to say it's just a little bell that says assess for danger. Or here's the other thing. When I find the immediate connection, I've just fallen in love with Angela. Known her for 2 days, but I'm gonna marry you. You're it. That immediate connection, right? Assess, slow down, pay attention, because I could just be seeing my grandma or my auntie or that dude that I just took care of me and saved me, right? At some point, who was dangerous, but was unhealthy, maybe even harmful, but also protected me and saved me from who knows
That's what I
what,
was going to
right?
say, is that
So,
it represents the safety, or it represents the lack of safety in either situation that we've already talked about in examples. I heard a preacher once say that once you've had a dysfunctional childhood, you pretend to be a baseball player, and between bases, the ball is in one of the uh, baseman's hands, and they're tossing it over your head, and they're closer and closer to you as you try to get safe. All you're trying to do is get to a base. And that reminds me so much of what you just said, that you can take it
yeah,
either direction in the extreme. You've lacked safety, you've lacked security in your life, and you either immediately jump into relationships all the way and are completely in love with them the second you meet them, or you're the opposite and you never trust, you are super protected and all those things. So I see so much of those examples in myself. And I think where I want to go next is just the concept of breaking the cycle, and how you feel breaking the cycle sort of plays into this process. And
yeah, breaking the cycle. It's actually, I don't know where that comes from for you, but it's actually a word that's used very much in the sexual violence world. Breaking the cycle, especially if we're talking about sexual violence of people you know, which are the most common, whether it's childhood or adult, is much more rare. 1 in 3 women get sexually assaulted, 1 in 6 boys. Those are the statistics in this country. Something. Breaking the silence. You said breaking the cycle, but it's also about breaking the silence. Breaking the cycle only happens if you can break your silence, right? What happened? The whole thing, right? Now, this is a little complicated in telling stories and breaking your silence. In order to break a cycle, you need to be very mindful of who you're telling the stories. And I like saying, we're going to break this cycle by breaking the silence in a way that feels regulated to your system. So there's no need for you to tell me or anyone. And I am saying this to you, Angela, to your audience. If you're working with a therapist or coach or any person who says, tell me exactly what they did to you, that's not helpful. That is not helpful. That's going to be re-triggering, right? You may want to tell me exactly what happened. And so it's helpful if you want to share that. And then my responsibility, my tending to that story as you share it with me, is to make sure it's very paced. It's what we call very titrated. Little bits of the very ugly, sad, violent pieces. Little pieces couched in a lot of comforting, a lot of support, a lot of, are you here? And by here, I mean, or are you dissociated, right? Are you regulated? Are you still breathing? Can you tolerate more? And if you can't, okay, then let's go back to the story. So I'm the kind of therapist that will interrupt you a million times if you're telling me a trauma story, because it is unhealthy and re-traumatizing to let someone stay in the trauma experience for the mere purpose of breaking their silence, because that will just keep you continuing to feel triggered and re-traumatized. So breaking the cycle is about breaking the silence in a regulated way. We also call it in a pendulated way. So you're telling me something that's very, very painful and uncomfortable. I'm going to say, let's stop. Let's take a deep breath. Let's look around and tell me, did you have breakfast yet? Like, we're going to talk about anything that's going to bring you pendulate back to just like a pendulum. We go in and out of the experience of activation. right? Until the person feels more able. So there may be a day where I can tell you, and I can tell you today, I won't, the entire details of what my childhood sexual abuse experience was like. But now I can tolerate it. Now I've built tolerance. And it's building the tolerance that then breaks the cycle. Because for as long as I don't have the tolerance for whatever the experience was, there's a part of me, and this is a little tricky, but there's a part of me that's looking to complete that cycle. Women who say to me, why is this my third abusive relationship? Why don't I leave my abusive, physically abusive, whatever abusive, narcissistic spouse? And in part, it's because you're wanting to figure out how to make it so that you can tolerate it. Oh, I'm going to get stronger, or I'm going to have more capacity. Oh, he's not going to trick me this next time. Right? So there's a repetition that happens. And unfortunately, people blame themselves. People blame themselves when they find themselves in those repetitive, habitual, repetitive ways of functioning and behaving and interacting with people.
And it's generally more manipulative than just that one abuse. There's gaslighting, there's verbal abuse, there's other pieces of the pie generally, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking now about violence in relationships. There's and I don't mind giving them some credit. Duluth, Minnesota, the domestic violence program of Duluth, Minnesota. They were the first people, and we still use this stuff today, and I'm talking at least 40 years ago. They developed what they call the cycle of violence, the stages. It's not always violent. After violence, after explosion, there's a moment of what we used to call the honeymoon phase or respite. And then there's the tension that starts to build. And then there's another violent episode. And in time, that cycle sometimes disappears because the events of violence are going so quickly that you don't even appreciate those moments of respite. So that's one thing they came up with. They also came up with what they call the power and control wheel, as well as the equity wheel. Right? First the power and control, and then later in some years they came up with the equity wheel. All the different ways in which someone who needs to feel in control, because that's a person who's abusive is just really striving and desperately in need for control. So they will manage and control your money, your finances, your relationships, isolation, verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, right? It's all part of getting you to become more and more dependent, particularly the isolation, right? To get you to become more dependent, because the more dependent you are on them, the aggressor, the more empowered they feel, right? So it's just fascinating, yeah, to know that I like using the word grooming, right? That you're being groomed, you're being prepared, and whether it's childhood sexual abuse, where that language grooming definitely applies there, right? The person who is really kind to you, sweet, nice, tells you you're special and smart and the best of everybody and everything on the team and the family and the classroom. You trust them. And that's how they get to then violate you, right? And that's also the real unfortunate challenge. And as you move on from that experience is, can you trust? Can you trust? Right? Can you trust people who are kind? Can you trust people who are not trying to control you? Do they really care or do they not care? It gets really confusing. So relationships are really difficult for people who've experienced abuse of any kind.
Agreed. And I particularly love, I'm still thinking about it, what you were talking about with the tolerance building, that you're practicing moving in and out of the trauma memory without it overtaking you. That is so interesting to me, that concept. We talk on this show about practicing lots of things. You brought up yoga earlier and meditation. Those are
meditation.
practices.
Those are
We
practices.
practice
We
small
practice
acts of
small acts
moving in
of
in a situation
moving
where we're
in
really
a
stuck.
situation where
But
we're really
I
stuck.
didn't
But
think of
I
it
didn't
as
think of
much
it
in that
as much
tolerance
in that
of
tolerance of
speaking.
speaking.
Um, One of the hardest things I
One of the
feel
hardest things
about
I feel about
grief and trauma is
grief and
that
trauma
speaking
is
about it the first
speaking
time is
about
the
it the
hardest.
first time is the hardest.
But to your point,
But to your
it's
point,
not just about
it's not
the
just about
entire
the entire
experience that you're
experience that
relaying.
you're relaying.
Going to it at
Going
all
to it
can
at
feel
all
incredibly
can feel
unsafe and
incredibly unsafe and
insecure and those kinds of
insecure
things.
and
So
those kinds of
I
things. So
really
I
like
really
the way
like the way
you explain going back
explain going back
in and out, and then
and in
maybe
and
going a
out,
little
and then
further
maybe
in
going a
and then
little
coming
further
back
in and
out.
then coming back
Those are
out.
really
Those are
great
really
ways for us to
great
think
ways for
about
us to think about
that healing
that
process,
healing
because it doesn't
process
feel
because it
like
doesn't
I have
feel
to be
like
able
I
to
have to be
give
able
all of the
to give
details. I
all of
have
the
to be able
details. I
to
have to be able
convince
to
you it happened,
convince you it
all of
happened.
those pieces
All
that
of
come
those
along with the
pieces that come
trauma.
along with the trauma.
I just have to start.
I just have to start.
Yeah, I ran as a clinical director and then executive director a rape crisis center here in DC for many years. And oh my God, I had to revise those intakes the moment I got there. What are you asking these people, right? What are you asking them? Yes, we're going to get to the story. And I understand that sometimes there are logisticals, like if you got raped as an adult, we need to have all the details because you may want to, have a case, or you may need to go get a forensic exam, or there may be police investigation. But one of the things that I was very instrumental in, and I feel really good about, is helping train police departments, particularly the sexual assault units, because they were gruesome in interviewing the victim. And understandably so. They want to catch this person who did this to you, right? They want to get this person convicted or whatever. But you need to give space and time. You have to give it space and time. So it's a delicate balance. I like starting any discussion with someone who tells me they're a survivor of anything with how is it to even begin to talk about it. Before I ask a question about it, I'm going to ask you, Angela, what's it like to anticipate that? We may just talk about that at some point. Maybe not today, but at some point. What does that bring up, right? We're just tapping into, just touching into that activation that has been either frozen or, they talk about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the responses to trauma. Just what is it like to just touch into it? Can you tolerate that before we go any further? So no, I'm not going to ask you what time did the incident happen and when and what did they do to you and where were you going? What were you that's not helpful to a survivor. It may be helpful to police report, right? But not helpful to a survivor. So that in lots of the rape crisis centers across the nation, there are advocates that will accompany a survivor to make a police report, to a hospital for what they call a SANE exam, a sexual assault nursing forensic exam, right? Because these folks are just like, okay, we got to get the sample, come on, right? And then the advocates like, take a deep breath. She needs a moment, wait, right? I don't know. Talking about that also brings up the experience and the memories of how often I had to explain to police departments or other forms of legal people, she doesn't remember. She's not making it up. She really doesn't remember, right? Because our bodies also protect us. Again, that those signs, right? It's not it is dangerous in assess for danger. And that same thing holds true when I don't have memory or when my story changes. That's actually how I got involved at the agency with the police department, is that they were like, we don't understand. Why do they keep changing their story? Well, because the safer they feel, the more access they have to information. We need to make room for that. Make room for the interviews to change, right? The testimonies to be organic, because more information will come up. How often have I worked with people who would say nothing about their perpetrators until the perpetrators were deceased? Now I can finally say that my dad sexually abused me. But until then, right, the secrecy, the protection, the fear, the retaliation, it's a lot. So again, being able to honor your body and pace yourself. We got into this conversation based on you saying, what about the pendulating, the titrating? It's extremely important. And that doesn't mean that, you don't talk about it. It just means that it has to be done with the intention to not re-traumatize. It has to be slow, titrated, mindful, lots of resources. A big conversation I have with survivors of any kind of trauma. What are your resources? And that's what I call the holistic pieces, right? What do you do? Because I can tell you I do yoga, I meditate, I pray, I do all the, I can tell you all the things I do that may not work for you. For you, it may be just holding your dog. That may be what grounds you, right? So what's a resource for you so that when we get into the material that is indeed activating, I know to say, oh, remember your grandma. This is a good time to, right? When I said I pendulate what to have for breakfast, the question may be, tell me a story about your grandma. You mentioned her a while ago. Can you tell me a little story about her? Because now I know grandma's a resource, right? Or the doggy or whatever it may be.
Whatever
Yeah.
brings
Whatever
you
brings
safety,
you safety,
even if it's a memory of
even if it's
safety,
a memory of
it's
safety,
still valid
it's
and
still valid
important in
and
those moments. I
important.
just
Well, remember,
really
yeah.
love that.
Really
I
love
really
that.
do.
Yeah,
I really
I
do.
would just want to add, remember that when we're talking about the body, we're talking about sensation. So the body doesn't know. It holds old memories, but it doesn't know what's real. I forgot to mention this when I was saying it's timeless. So it could be today's real, yesterday's or tomorrow's. Today's, yesterday, or tomorrow. Imagine, perceived, or real. The sensation in the body could be imagined. I remember that sensation. Perceived. I think that's where this is going to lead, right? Or real. It doesn't really, it holds all the experiences, but it doesn't have a way of processing it. And the younger we are in the moment of the traumatic experience, the less access we have to neocortex and an ability to really even understand. Right? Because the other thing is when we are experiencing traumatic events, the neocortex goes offline. This is scientific. This has been tested. Your thinking brain is not necessary. If you're about to get burned by hot water, you're going to move. You're not going to say, oh, I wonder if that water is going to be hot and how hot will it be and will it burn me? You're out of there the moment you sense it, right? So it is really critical to remember that as well, right? That the body doesn't know space and time and perceives, right? But maybe it's not real. Yeah.
And especially now
And
when you're
especially
remembering
now
it,
when you're remembering it,
you have those
you
ebbs and
have those
flows of
ebbs and
this
flows of
isn't, I'm not experiencing
I'm
this
not
right this minute.
experiencing this
I'm
right
just
this minute.
relaying
I'm
it.
just
And you
relaying
have to
it.
remember
And
that
you
that's
have
the
to
case.
remember
I
that
think
that's the case. I think
there's just so much beauty
there's
in
just
that,
so much beauty
in
in that
yeah.
tolerance
And,
building.
yeah.
tolerance
Yeah.
building.
And you are experiencing it because if the sensations are coming up, the body, it could be right back there, thinks it's right back there again, right? Especially when again, I started to say, your neocortex goes offline because we don't need to think that there's a car coming. We just run. We don't think about the distance or how fast am I. We run, right? In the same way that we disconnect from our limbic brain, the part of our brain that feels emotional, and it's totally happening at the reptilian level of your brain, at your brainstem. The brain, I like to say that the neocortex speaks the language of words. The limbic brain speaks the language of emotions. And the stem of your brain, which is where all of this activity we're talking about takes place, only speaks the language of sensation. If it senses something, it thinks it's true. Hence why people change their stories the more their testimonies, the safer they feel, right? Yeah.
Learn from the book.
Yes, my book is a memoir. It's my story. I am the spiritual warrior. And it's my story from birth, basically, to adulthood, mainly focused on the trauma experiences along the way and the healing tools. When I was first introduced to an ashram is the equivalent of a monastery for an Indian Swami, right? Hindi. When I used to walk into churches in New York City because they were kept open, the cathedrals, the Catholic churches are beautiful, and how amazed. I never would like to go when there was mass, but I loved going on my own and sneaking in and just watching all the beautiful things that were there, right? Statues, they're saints, but I just thought, right? It speaks to my introduction to aromatherapy and essential oils and drumming. It's a beautiful story. What I hear people say, it's like being on a big roller coaster because I'm titrating throughout the book, right? There's the day that my sister sexually abused me. And then there's the day that my teacher saved me. And then there's my dogs in the fields. And then there's, right, so it goes up and down, ebbs and flows. And I'll tell you something for those who are interested in writing their stories or writing their books, that one of the things that I did, and I didn't come up with this, my writing coach helped me with this, was that I told this is very telling, Angela. When I came to her with my manuscript, which was a bunch of journals that I had put together, literally, I'd been journaling for years, and I said, look, I have a manuscript. She said, oh, you have an amazing story, lady, right? Number one, because I was sexually abused, and this may be a little triggering, to trigger warning here, but I was sexually abused by my sister, and oftentimes men in those days when I was growing up were the aggressors, but I was sexually abused by my sister and her spouse. And the other thing that's unique about my story is that I was sexually abused when I started when I was 11. And usually when you hear child sexual abuse, they're younger kids, right? And it went from 11 till about 17 years old. So those are things that are unusual in the story of sexual violence. But one of the things that my writing coach, bless her heart, she said to me was, you have an amazing story and everybody needs to hear this story, but you're writing from the wound. She said, you're writing here from the wound. You want to write from your scars, right? Which meant you need to write from the perspective that you've been on this healing journey, right? You need to give hope. You need to give light. You need to show the benefit of doing the work, the healing work, because we're not. And she knew nothing about trauma, but she said, this is a lot. I've read your manuscript and I've sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And I was like, oh no, Maxine, I didn't mean to do that. Right? And that's not, it's not a Stephen King, is it? The guy who does all those books. It's not supposed to like keep you on the edge of your seat forever until the last page. And then you're like, what happened? It's a healing story. It does have moments where it's really intense. And if you identify, right, your body will respond. But it's just so beautifully weaved in with light and joy. There's a big piece where I lived on 70 acres of land for 2 years. The most beautiful time I ever had in my life, as well as the most treacherous, even worse than the sexual violence. And that's a whole nother story. You'll have to read the book to find out about. But a big part of my task while I was there was to clear, and I'm from New York City, remember? It was to clear the wooded areas. And me and this old man called Mr. Boswell, white old man, he came with his tractor. He would pull the trees down and cut them up for me. And my task was to feed them to the fire and burn them, right? Because what are we going to do with all these? And I was only clearing 1 acre. I only needed 1 little acre for my trailer. That's it, right? But a lot of the book, the story, particularly the story of a lot of the trauma, takes place while I'm burning wood, right? So I'm burning the wood, and then I dissociate, and then I remember that story, and then he says, "Hey, careful!" And then I go back to burning more wood, and then I dissociate, and then my dogs run, and then I'm telling you the story about my doggies because I lived there by myself 1 year with 2 dogs, and Mr. Boswell, who visited almost every week to burn wood, right? So again, even the trauma stories are within a space that feels storytelling, right? Restorative. The other piece of the book that I love, that I did very intentionally, is that there's a big section in the back where there are questions and answers. So the way that I kind of figured that out was for people to do in book studies or for sexual assault, rape centers, domestic violence centers to use as group discussions. So there's a question that's posed, and then I answer as the therapist, and I answer as the survivor, and I give tips, right? So it's a nice way to have discussion, even if you know nothing about the topic, a nice way to kind of bring in, because it's not a theoretical book. I thought another self-help book. No, it's my story. And you hear, yeah, another one. I don't think so. There are too many, too much competition, right? I wanted to write something that felt that people could really identify, see themselves. And then what did I do? Right? What was it like the first time I walked into an ashram and heard chanting? I was like, oh my God. Right? When I grew up with a brother who had schizophrenia, and he joined the Hare Krishnas before they were cool. I still don't think they're cool. Some people don't think the Hare Krishnas are cool, right? They're a little scary sometimes. But my brother thought they were the coolest thing. And he was a Hare Krishna. And we were like, you're a who? What? From a Latin family, right? Catholic Latin family. Yeah. But when I first heard chanting, and I thought, oh, that's what my brother may have felt in the midst of his madness, right? In the midst of his active schizophrenia, there was something that was resonating for him. And now I chant. I'm not a Hare Krishna. I'm an interfaith minister, because that was the other thing I discovered. Like, what is faith? What is this thing called God? And why is it so limited, right? So I studied interfaith ministry, became ordained, because I just wanted to be among the people, the Jews, the Hindus, right? The people with different faith, the Buddhists, what do they think about God, right? And came to understand, for me, with much respect to religion, that there's only one God. There's many different paths to the truth. So call it what you want. It's this energy. Sometimes I call it Mother, Father, God, Creator, right? Universe. It's just something that's greater than I am. And that saved my life. That saved my life.
My family members that have been in recovery said the God as you know him.
The God as you know him.
And so that makes a lot of sense
Whatever
to
that
me
means.
to be able to present it that way, right? Whatever it means.
How can we find
Obviously, you live nearby, but how can we find you and work with you out in the world?
Well, the first thing is to check my website. It's HP for Higher Power or Healing Potential. So hpbysanta.net. So hpbysanta.net. That's my website, and it has all the information you ever wanted to know about me. And I'm also on social media. My name's Santa Molina-Marshall, or Holistic Psychotherapy, on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. My greatest and latest is that I am developing a very specific program, Angela, and blessings to my program. Anybody who wants to bless it, that's one way you could give back to me, is that I'm developing a program called the Freedom Formula for Women of Color Leaders. Because the thing I didn't mention to you about my book is that I also wanted to say to I had so many staff people and colleagues in the field of sexual violence who had not broken their own silence, hence had not broken their own cycles, right? Because of shame, because of fear. What does it mean to be a survivor? What does it mean to be a wounded healer? And so I wanted to write a story from the professional perspective as a professional woman saying, you know what? You need to tell your story and it's okay. And that's what makes me a great therapist is that I am transparent. You don't have to read my book to be my client, but if you want to know, it's there. And I'm going to use what lesson 101 in social work school, the use of self for the purpose and the benefit of the client. So I use myself. I don't tell you my story unless you ask or unless there's something I want, an example I want to use. Right. So, yeah, but that program is the reason why I wrote that book, the program the Freedom Formula for Women of Color Leaders, because there are people dying and I mean, burning out, relapsing from all kinds of addiction, being triggered. Oh my God, I saw so many. The revolving door at the rape crisis centers because the staff was not taking care of themselves, right? And so taking care of ourselves and not being ashamed is part of the reason why I've started this, I'm developing this program that hopefully will lunge sometime by the end of this year.
To see it, that it's going to be a needed thing in this world. We have to take better care of each other. We have to teach each other to take better care of ourselves, but we haven't done a very good job of that so far in our society. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. That's going to be beautiful.
Absolutely. The thing I didn't get a chance to mention at all and that you don't know about me, Angela, is that I'm also a public speaker. I do a lot of keynote addresses and trainings. And a big part of what I get invited to do is either sexual violence, right? Or what about your story, but also about vicarious trauma. And so I just wanted to say that in respect of all the revolving door therapists and counselors that go in and out of these systems is vicarious trauma is real, right? Secondary trauma it's in the DSM, the Diagnostic Scientific Manual. So when you experience trauma, when you're witnessing it, not when you experience it, of course, but when you're witnessing it over and over again, hearing these stories, it has an impact on you as well. So in the spirit of self-care and taking care of each other, it's important to honor that. Yeah.
Incredibly. I was actually just talking to somebody earlier today about the concept that I experience, and all I'm doing is trying to allow a safe container for people to bring their stories to the world on the show. And I do feel my empathy get taxed at times that I hear a story and then I need to be able to go do something else after for a little while. I need to be able to disconnect for a bit. But I tend to relive things in my own head. I tend to remember and sort of go over memories multiple times, and so that's very really good advice.
Yeah, it's the nature of a human being, right? That cares and that has compassion and that's opening your heart. When you open your heart, and I feel your heart open, to receive and to really listen, then it's like being a fire person, a fireman, and not putting on your gear, right? You have to put on your gear and then decompress afterwards. So compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, secondary re-traumatization is real. And we need to take care of each other. Yeah. And ourselves.
Yeah. Of course, to be able to help each other, we have to. It's that whole concept of I have to put my mask on first before I put anyone else's mask on. When they tell you to do that in an airplane, but I really do feel that.
Yeah, or teach people how to put on their own mask, right? So that we can all be masking at the same time.
And not have to worry about helping each other.
That may be a whole other episode, right? The masking thing. What COVID did to our nation. Oh my God. That's a whole other topic. But yeah, we can all be taking care of ourselves at the same time. Yeah.
So agree. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing with us your particular story and your way of healing. That is so life-giving. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, or responding to my desire to be interviewed by you, and to all your listeners. Yeah, life is beautiful, and I just really want to encourage us to go after it. It's not too late. My personal quote sometimes is, they took away my childhood, but they're not going to take away my adulthood. Right? And I have a lot of fun to make up for. So this is our turn. This is the time. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Santa. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.